Regional Science to Professor Thomas uh, for kindly agreeing to make this session uh, uh, happen and being a keynote speaker. And I also thank on behalf of the Regional Science, and also I thank Professor Hoogendoorn. Uh, and my thanks go to Professor Stabok Roy because he has taken all the initiative to organize this uh, conference. The Regional Science Association is an affiliate of the Regional Science Association International, and we have been holding seminars and conferences all through the year within India in collaboration with different universities, academic institutions, and we receive enormous support from Regional Science Association International in our endeavor. And today's topic is tourism, and tourism industry is one of the biggest industries, possibly the biggest industry. I would say it is a hospitality industry, and which employs millions of people and which creates millions of or billions of dollars of income across continent. Uh, During the COVID times, the hospitality industry was badly hit, and it affected millions of lives of the people. So, in terms of multiplier effects, I think the tourism industry is its role is quite immense, and it has different facets. It has cultural aspects. It has nowadays it has climatic aspects, and it has historical, geographical, and also technological aspects. And I hope during the deliberations, the paper presenters will be presenting papers on different issues related to tourism, especially the sustainability issue of the tourism development. There is a debate whether too much tourism is bad, especially in fragile ecosystems. I hope in the next few hours, the speakers and the participants will be deliberating on all these issues. And I do not want to waste much time. I again welcome everybody, and especially Professor Thomas and Professor Hoogendoorn for kindly attending this seminar, and we would eagerly look forward to their precious uh, lectures, which am sure the young regional scientists and scholars they will benefit a lot. And I again welcome on behalf of the Regional Science Association everybody and wish the seminar a great success. Thank you. Over to Professor Harish.
Thank you so much, sir, for setting the tone of this summit, at the same time for highlighting the different importance of giving a concern on this tourism. And indeed, the tourism is playing a key roles in the development of a country's economy, at the same time in welcoming and providing hospitalities to the peoples who belongs to the other countries. Thank you so much once again. Now it's time for me on my personal behalf, at the same time on behalf of this organizing committee, to honor and to introduce our chief guest, Professor Tomaz Ponce Dentinho, a distinguished academic specialized in regional, environmental, and agricultural economics. He has served as a professor at the University of Azores in Portugal and hold the positions of editor-in-chief for the journal Regional Science Policy and Practice. His academic journey also includes 3 years in agronomy and 2 years in engineering, reflecting a multidisciplinary approach to his research and teaching. And his research interests also encompass regional science and agricultural economics, with a focus on the spatial dynamics of economic activities and sustainable development. Throughout his career, Professor Ponce Professor Dentinho has contributed significantly to the understanding of how regional policies can promote economic growth while preserving environmental integrity. In addition to his teaching and research roles, Professor Dentinho has authored and edited several publications that explore the interplay between globalization, regional development, and others like competitiveness. And notably, he has co-edited works such as Globalization Trends and Regional Development, Dynamics of FDI and Human Capital Flows and Network Space and Competitiveness, and Evolving Challenge for Sustainable Growth, which help us to understand the different impacts of global economic trends on regional economics. So Professor Dentinho's extensive experience and scholarly contributions make him a leading voice in the field of regional science and sustainable development. And sir, we are indeed privileged and gratified for your presence here in this platform. And we invite you to share a few words regarding this summit. Sir, please.
Okay, I'm going to share, try to share my presentation. Yeah. Can you see me? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Very clearly visible, sir.
Okay, I don't see you, but I can hear you. So it's good. So
yes, we can see
we
you
can
and
see
hear
you,
you
sir.
both.
okay.
We can see you at the
Okay,
same time,
very
so
good.
your slide is very clearly visible.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you. I'm sorry for the delay. I thought these time hours, these are difficult sometimes to guess, and I thought that my presentation would have been 2 hours ahead. But anyway, well, I'm a little bit delayed, but we can catch up. Well, thank you very much, and congratulations for this organization. In fact, tourism is a crucial element. Tourism is growing. In my place in the Azores, in the last 10 years, there was a boom in tourism due to the amenities of the islands, but mainly due to the liberalization of the transport by air that allowed the prices of fares flights to reduce substantially, and then it is growing all the way, not only in the main islands but also in smaller islands. So it is a very important topic to analyze, and then also to talk about its competitiveness and its sustainability. I have to say that well, when I write my papers or I think about, I try to learn from Boaventura Sousa Santos, which was a philosopher in sciences, and some time ago I read a book on him about this double cut with reality that is the job of scientists. The first cut is between the common sense that is in the news, that is in the policymakers and so on, and science, trying to find if there is some assumption that was not taken before. And then the second cut with reality is really to be like the medical doctors do, to jump into reality and try to risk and try some advice. And that's I think the attitude I've been taken, and has been somehow interesting because we have something in our research, something that is evident, that we prove it's more or less evident, that we have an intuition that is evident, and then it's a little bit different from the former common sense. And that's the attitude also I'm taking along these works that I've been in tourism, and so eventually there is some doubts in the common sense that nowadays exists about tourism and regional development. Well, this is a photo of Damão. Damão, you know, was a Portuguese enclave in India, and I put it here not only because I'm Portuguese, but also to be a little bit pushy, to have outsiders in your hometown, forced in a little bit in this case, or coming through tourism or migration or whatever, is a challenge. So it's a challenge because there is on one way it is on one hand it is human interaction within space, which is a very good thing. We like to interact with each other and naturally within space. But on the other hand, there are changes in both sides. There are changes, there are adaptations, there are challenges that we must overcome. And we know what is the difference in the prospects. Now we have the world is full of wars. So this small barrier between what is a conflict and what is a peaceful interaction, it's what we have in the markets, what we have in migration, what you have in tourism. But that's a challenge. And that's very important to know that in terms of society, in terms of sociology, if you want, about human interaction, it's not an easy task, or at least it's something that we must be aware, and that's why people have reacted. There are many ways to do it. One way, like the Spanish do in Canary Islands, is that they put the tourism over there, far away from the local communities. They build their own resorts, and they grow like something that is a factory to produce money. That's one way of dealing with tourism, is to put them in resorts a little bit far away, and that do not disturb the local community. Of course, this is not simple, because in countries that are not so wealthy, what tends to happen is that nearby the resorts, there will be slums and poverty, because these resorts need jobs, need people to help, and the multiplier, and these jobs are not well paid, and therefore there is around these enclaves, there is usually poverty, as there is poverty around military bases, and there are poverty around some big infrastructure, big investments, if the country is not wealthy enough, or if the wealth that comes from these investments is not used to do social policy, to arrange housing and so on in nearby effect. And for this we need some planning. The other ways, we have big cities like we have in Kolkata or in Delhi or in Mumbai, and then tourism is just, although important, is just does not impact very much in the functioning of the cities, and it is visitors. So I call it visitors. It's not really part of a strategy, of the main strategy of the city or of the region. If it is just a visitor that passes by and visits some monument, or just enjoys the life of the city itself, like happens in most of the Italian cities or the Spanish cities, or cities that attract, or places that attract tourism, but they don't interfere very much in, they create wealth, but they don't interfere very much in the functioning of the society there. And then there is what we think it is good, that we disperse the tourism. We disperse, and we call it rural tourism or whatever, and that's eventually a nice idea, but in fact the impact is spread around, and not necessarily better. It seems better, but it is not necessarily better than the mass tourism, or than the tourism that is now the visitors tourism. So it depends very much, and depends very much on the place, and the solution that is adapted to one place is not necessary to the other, and mainly the solution, or the management of the solution, does not depend only on us, depend on the tourism, and they are the main drivers of the system, of the process. And so that's why we must be take into account this, because it's easier that the tourists, with their money, with their public, with their attitude, they just create their own resource, and there are like small colonies that these people that outsiders built in our own places without much interaction with our places. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to after this introduction, I'm going to, as I told you, to talk about with just two searches in ChatGPT, what is the common knowledge? And common knowledge, the good thing of ChatGPT in literature review is that because it is more or less 2 years delay, so it's the common knowledge. It's knowledge what was created, but then transformed into policy reports and then picked up by the politicians and by the journalists. So ChatGPT is nice for that, also to arrange data, but I used mainly to know what they said about the topic that I'm talking now. And then I look at my own work of, well, some work, not so many. I'm not very much specialized in tourism, but I live in a tourist region nowadays, and in a tourist country. I have this experience, and also I built up this hypothesis that along 3 or 4 papers and chapters and presentations I've been developing and somehow turning evident. A simple method, an indicator, which is the number of tourism per 100 inhabitants, and that's a good indicator about the intensity of tourism in each place. A little bit of Portugal, and then a risky attempt to focus on India places, to use this indicator for some of the most known tourist places in India, some discussion about literature and some conclusion. Okay, so regional science. Regional science is about the study of people and places interaction within space, and it's nice because people interaction within space about love, and tourism is human interaction. So it can be, and it is usually a good thing. So it is the focus of regional science, as well as migration, as well as exchanges, economic exchanges, and it is as well as family interactions and friends interactions. So it's a good thing. It can be a good thing, and it can be the focus of regional science that does that, studies human interaction within space with replicable methods, and I would like to say effective evidences. So it's not just for scientists, it's somehow that there is a problem to solve, to address, and we try to produce evidence that allow us to give more clarity, to be more transparency to the problem, and to eventually to test solutions to the problem that came out. Second point is about dreams and reals. You know that there is all this propaganda about tourism, very much pushed by the tourists, in order to have good receptions by those that host the tourism, in order to have a change in. So the tourist is not an enemy. The tourist is not a stranger. The tourist is someone that should be welcome because it is. And that's very interesting in the islands of the Azores, because when the first tourists arrive in some island, then usually they are taken nicely. But if it is possible to steal them, to rob them, because people just see that he's one tourist, so that's the opportunity eventually to have some more money. That happens also in many countries. That first phase, that the tourist is somehow a foreigner, an outsider. It's the first phase of tourism. Well, families and people think that there is someone that is there, is wealthy than we are, and so it's not a crime. It's not bad to steal or to put prices higher than it is. And that can be somehow a barrier to further development. There are wonderful places in Brazil, in Bahia and in Rio. It's a wonderful city, but people are robbed. People are still people. There is crime, so they don't become a tourist attraction because the society, the local society, see the outsider as an intruder, and they are not well. And as each intruder is an opportunity to rob, and we don't think about the next people that should come and about the marketing that can come. So security and mainly the attitude regarding tourism is very important. Another thing that is very important is that in fact tourism is people are searching for amenities, for good weather, for culture, and there is a rent of this. There is money created by that. There is an extra value coming from culture, coming from nature, and coming from different amenities, coming from health, and so where this money goes, that's very important to know, because otherwise there is not multiplier effects of this money. There is some wages that are but wages are very low paid. So the way the value added of tourism activity is allocated between the operators, the retailers, the transport companies, and the local providers, it's crucial. So it's if you want to win some money, you must have these competitive advantages and some economic benefit in development. You must have be aware of the balance between foreign investment and local investment, and somehow the ownership of that investment, so that you can on one hand attract tourism, and on the other hand get some increasing benefits for that tourism. And of course we don't know finally what is the optimal openness, how much tourism we should have. There is a threshold pointed out some time ago, just I heard the number, that they made a study on the Greek islands, and they tell that it's 15% of the population. So if you have in the same place and at the same time, let's say 15 tourists and 85 locals, that's a good balance. But that's a strange name. That in fact is the number that appears when the tourism becomes the only engine of the economy, the only export of this economy. And so that's it's the maximum, but that is only when the economy growth depends on tourism. So eventually we must discover what is the optimal openness, going a little bit behind in order to have a more diversified, if possible, economic base, or in order to evolve from that. And that's a challenge that I discovered when I prepare this lecture, and it's a very interesting one. What is the optimal openness for tourism? And I'm not sure if it is the 15% that our Greek colleagues discovered. Okay, the literature. What if you click on ChatGPT? It says a little bit what is in the common sense. So that tourism, on one hand, promotes regional development because of all the regions that were already enunciated by our colleagues, and because it promotes cultural change, which is not necessarily exchange, and eventually cultural change, which is not necessarily good. Employment opportunities, but many times these employments are a little bit better than the employment that exists, but they are not necessarily better and than the other type of employments, and that eventually they don't evolve into better productivity. And of course there is a boom. When there is a boom in tourism, the first ones the first thing we feel in the economy is the construction. So for instance, in Canary Islands, it's the weight of the construction company in the development of tourism is eventually much more than the effect of the of what of the management of tourism that goes every year with the feeding and animating the tourist attraction. So, but okay, as it was said, and I experience and you experience, when there is money that coming from outside, there are more jobs. There is the multiplier effect, direct and direct and induced. And these multiplier effects at the beginning, they use the economic tissue of the locals. So people have to feed them, have to get places for them, and eventually to animate with the local culture. So it's not difficult to catch up if people feel safe, if there is a decrease in the costs of the flights and of transportation, and if in 1 or 2 years there are buildings, nice buildings that people can stay. So that's true, and that's a movement that appears. The only thing I'm going to put is that does not appear everywhere. If I talk about India, I recognize some places that are announced. If you talk about Portugal, and if it's a little bit far away, or if you talk about France or about any country, you remember 2 or 3 places that you want to visit, and these are the winners. So tourism is not the panacea for all the places in a particular region. Usually in a region that can be the size of Portugal, you have 5 places that in fact are catching up, and there can earn from tourism. The other places eventually they invest more in tourism because there is lack of creativity, and then tourism did not appear, and tourism and because it's something that it's not a nice view that generates demand for having houses there for tourists. It's not a nice landscape that creates immediately tourism there. Well, you look at the landscape, okay, after 1 hour you go out and you don't stay there. So that idea that a nice landscape and a nice view creates demand for tourism is not there in that place, is not necessarily the case. Then you have competitive tourism. There is a lot of wording on that. Of course, the problem of over tourism, that we don't know where it is, because then tourism catch up and then it develops by itself, and we don't know for how long. There are villages in the Alps that have been destroyed one after the other due to tourism. They go up the Alps, and then the first village that has ski resort develops, and then it is congested, and they move to another village, and then to another village. So, and the same happens with the coast, with the beaches, that we have one place to swim that is nearby your place, reachable by train or whatever, or by the existent transport that existed at the time, and then you move to further away to other beaches, then of course the first beach disappears. So that's what happens in many places that we heard from the name, that are in the movies, like Biarritz and in each country. And then these resorts were overcome by further away resorts due to the evolution of transport and of the air transport mainly. Okay, and then there is all these collaborative efforts, and there is the problem of greenwashing, that you announce something that is wonderful in the web, and then it is not. And then of course it is after a while that creates that there is a small boom in tourism, but then a drop. So in terms of competitive sustainable tourism, it's better to understand what the tourists bring, what they want, and to respond to their demands while keeping the sustainability of the place and in terms of culture and in terms of, which is difficult, because only when growth with tourism only happens when in fact the culture changes, when you in fact You have all the society of a place trying to serve the tourists, and that's normal. That happens also with the textiles clusters. That happens also with the automobile clusters. That happens with the San Jose of California, with these clusters related with the technologies. So there is a culture connected with the production system that reproduces itself and only creates growth and competitiveness when the culture itself changes. So the culture becomes the culture, or the integration of the culture of the outsiders, of the tourists, and ourselves. So and our own culture. So let me move now to the what I've learned along these years. I heard 3 talks that somehow were impressive for me. On one hand is that we don't know if per capita the mass tourism has more impact than the non-mass tourism, because the non-mass tourism spreads the impact of the tourist along space. Whereas mass tourism, you concentrate tourism there, you are able to put sewage, to put garbage collection, to have all the impact in a small place. Eventually, it's not nice for the tourists, but they like to live with each other. They like to experience a different place, but with friends that have eventually for their lives, and that's why we don't know if we don't need to be necessarily against mass tourism or a place that then suddenly is specialized in tourism, because there, when people are coming, then you can manage through price on one hand, and then through offering something that it's a mixture and creates these competitive advantages regarding other resorts. So, but and on the other hand, there is this idea that rich people spend more money than poor people, and it's not true. Rich people spend the same money as poor people when they are tourists, but poor people stay 2-3 days, and rich people can stay 1 month. But the economic impact of having a meal or having a beer in the pub, it is the same. It is roughly the same for poor and rich, because the poor like to pretend they are rich, and the rich are rich, or eventually can behave like poor if they are in a remote place where there is not many things. So that idea of mass tourism, it might be true, but depends on the way you design it, if it is bad or worse in terms of the impacts that have in sustainable development, in society, in the economy, and in the environment. Then, yes, I told you already that tourism, if not taken care, it can degrade village by village and beach by beach. So it is heating, and then it's congested, and then people move to another place, and then to another place, and the former place is somehow degraded. And that I learned that from a talk, well, I don't know, 30 years ago, with people from Mallorca, which has mature tourism, and they were thinking, okay, we are very good in tourism, but we want to know what is the next phase. They came to the place in Newcastle where I was studying for the PhD, and they invited me because I also came from a touristic place, and that was a challenge. How you evolve in tourism, how you evolve in attracting outsiders and there is this idea of teleworking that it can work. I'm not sure if it works, because in fact, if people go there just to consume, like in retirement or whatever, then the multiplier effect is not big, because they are not creative. If they go there and they can create something, this movement of moving south or moving to hot climates because of the global warming, that people have increased the taxes on carbon emissions. So that can be. So people moved to warmer climates because they want to feel the good weather, but on the other hand, they can move permanently because in the north taxes are becoming high due to global warming, and that can be a movement together. But of course, these countries, if you look at the taxes on carbon and the footprint, the absolute footprint of carbon, Sweden, Norway, with the production of oil, Denmark, all these countries that seem to be very ecological, in fact, they are not. They are the footprint, the carbon footprint per person, it's very high, and which only be lower if they increase the taxes on carbon, and they are not doing this. So, but that's something that should be taken in the global agenda to pass to this new phase where somehow the center of the economy moves due to avoid global warming, moves from the north a little bit into warmer climates. Okay, I have two papers. One, two papers that I discovered 2 days ago. One, to estimate the factors that influence tourist flow. We have 9 islands in the Azores. We have a lot of countries coming in. We have data on this. We did a gravity model, and we discovered that, in fact, what the crucial point is the transport costs, as the reality shown, and the features of the origins. So the Germans want to come to certain islands, the French to another islands, and of course the of time and the attributes of the destiny, if it is a nice place or if it has a nice urban environment, and time. So this cumulative effect that the tourists that are well treated, that feel good, they invite the others to come, and so there is a growth that the best marketing is done by the tourists themselves. Another paper that I worked for some time in it is about the eutrophication of the lagoons in the Azores Islands. A nice environment, very nice landscape, unique. This is a volcano within an island, and there is a problem due to agriculture on eutrophication. And in fact, it was the alternative use or the conjoint use of the place with tourists that in fact pushed the need to decrease the eutrophication, to change the land use a little bit, the land use in the basin, and then now the lagoons are less eutrophicated than they were before because of the conflict between farmers and that did not care much about the quality of the water, and the tourists that in fact care, or the tour operators that in fact were losing some money if the lagoons were not blue and green as they used to be. So that conflict, if well managed, that conflict that tourism brings can be very interesting for management, because we know in economics that the optimal comes from this point between supply and demand. In fact, it is a point of conflict. So the regulation of that point, the regulation of the growth in tourism, of the quality of the place is a good thing and not necessarily a bad thing. So the conflicts that appear when tourism came is not necessarily a bad thing. We are reaching the optimal, but we must know where is this optimal. So there are these book reviews. It's about these new rural people, and we like very well. That's trendy, but in fact, there is, as there is in the movie now, this series in Netflix, which is about Yellowstone. These conflicts, in fact, show a very important thing. If we live from the rural spaces, like farmers, hunters, or water collections or users of renewable energies, that is sustainable because this interaction keeps on. If we living outside and we came for rural areas for holidays, we don't know if it is sustainable, at least in the long term. If in the long term these small houses that have 2 or 3 hectares, and people feel that they are in the countryside, and in fact they cannot live on these 2 and 4 hectares in some places, and that's to live on rural areas. I don't know what will happen in these places, but it's all over. So how to manage these people that live on rural areas, but in fact their economic base is based on cities. Well, that's something that we need to study or to compare different places. I think if they specialize in some rural activities like producing specific wines or specific crops or whatever, or reading or writing or whatever, that may be used. But it's impossible to keep these places. For instance, if you have grass and you need to irrigate this grass just for the nice of a larger garden, well, we could understand that in terms of money that's too much, and eventually these places will be abandoned, and then even the agriculture could be difficult to do. So it is nice, but as everything that is nice, sometimes in the long term it's not so nice, and we must be aware of this and compare different places in the world. There is also this I told already about the design of the information communication networks along the value chain of the tourist value chain between retailers, operators, transporters, and local providers. It is and construction companies, and then the rents of the houses to where they go. It's very, very important because there is this Chinese dream of building cities all around the world. In fact, they are catching the most of the wealth of the world, which is real estate. But then their cities are in the wrong places, and that does not catch up. But anyway, the real estate is the ownership of real estate is really has always been a very good source of wealth. Where this wealth goes, it's a crucial point in terms of redistribution, and then in terms of multiplier effects and where they occur in the across space. Finally, tourism is very sensitive. The impact of tourism resulted in a decrease in GDP of 9% in the islands, and eventually more in other places, and that can be measured easily because there was a decrease in the number of hosts and tourists. And we don't know what it is, the optimal interaction. So we are at home, we spend 8 hours working, we spend the other hours at home, doing our own work at home, and then sleeping, and then eating, and then talking. This balance between exports and if we don't export, then our income will be half of what it is if we specialize. So this balance we don't know yet, and now we are moving into anti-globalization agenda. But in fact, some globalization is needed. But what is the optimal? We don't know for each place. I have a small analytical paper in this book that says that depends on the environmental and cultural capacity, on the multiplier effects that we talk about, and that's and then the relative centralities if we are far away or nearby the market. So all these impacts, but there is some. So it's not the same all over the world. It's not the same if you are near the market or are far away from the market. But anyway, it's something that it's not that we work as slaves or every time, every hour in the market of work, or every hour in the market of capital. So that usually that does not work for happiness. Okay, and finally, there is this paper that I'm going to talk about. It's about that this discovery, which is not a discovery, it's an evidence, we can see it, tourism is very much concentrated, spatially concentrates and promotes growth. That's a problem only when it is specialized. And that's so sometimes we think that tourism is a panacea for every small village around the country, or every city around the country, and then we have the European projects and programs that they are not creative enough, and then the agenda is that okay, you should have country, you should have you financed houses for or hotels for tourism, and then the hotels became empty. Why is that? Because of course the Europeans want to go anywhere and to have a place to stay, but then they choose some places more than others, and then there is a lot of money that is spent in strange things with the same model that thinking that tourism is a panacea for all regional development in rural areas or even in cities, like an extra element for the development of cities, of the central parts of the cities, where usually once in a while they are collapsed because of the old people and so on, and then tourism is good to recover. Can be, but not the same solution for all the places. For example, if you think about Portugal, the names came in. It is Lisbon, Porto, Fatima, which is a religious destination, the Algarve and Madeira, and that's it. The other places, people do not specialize, and then tourism does not create growth. That's the message. Okay, and that's now the indicator is very easy. First indicator of economic growth, it's the population. If people are free to move within a country from one place to another, if they don't have jobs in one place, they move to the other place with friends or family, or because they are asked to go, or they move to foreign countries, as happens in Portugal, because we have free movement of people between Portugal and Europe, and also because of family links, it's easy to go to the United States or to Canada for 3 months to work and then get some permanent work there. So population growth is a proxy of economic growth if the country, if there is free movement of people, and if people have the children that they are rational in the number of births, which most of the times it is like that. That's eventually the more rational thing people do in life, is that the number plus one or less one is the number of children that people want to have. And then the other point is that tourism intensity, so the number of tourists per in number and habitat, generates growth only if there are more than 5,000 tourists per 100 residents. And that we see here in the exercise I did for Portugal. Below 1,000, there is these places below 1,000 tourists per 100 inhabitants. These places, although they are known, they don't create growth. But when they reach maturity, in fact, meaning that the tourist sector is the base, the mainly base of the economy, then it is tourism itself that generates economic growth, not necessarily. Then we have the carrying capacity, but for instance, Albufeira, these places are also the places where people, tourists know that vote, where people vote in more extreme parties, or the right or the left. So in terms of socially, it's not necessarily the best thing, no? Because these places also need migrants to work in these jobs, and they also have the foreigners that work in these jobs. So somehow we don't know if this majority, for instance, in Albufeira or these places, are necessarily the best, but that's when they produce growth. So economic growth comes only, we know this from Adam Smith, that when we specialize, and when we specialize is that all the economic base is focused on tourism. Okay, so let's put the example of Portugal, and then in Portugal, as I said, we know a few places. We know the Algarve, Madeira, Fatima. We know a little bit now São Miguel in the Azores, the center of Lisbon and center of Porto, and other places. But in fact, it's not all of Portugal. It's only parts of Portugal. If you go to India, I just check in the internet. We know as a foreigner, Taj Mahal, Qubut Minar, Jaipur, Goa, Kerala, Varanasi, and so on. But we don't know. We have nice pictures in the internet, but we don't know. It's not all of India, of course. So, and these places, we saw here, these places in this map below tend to concentrate this intensity, the tourists that have, and also they backwash the effects around. For instance, if you go to Lisbon, the city, backwash the hotels that exists nearby before, close to the sea. So Cascais and Sintra and the other side of the river that have nice beaches. So people, tourists, what they do, they come to Lisbon and then they visit these places, but they don't go anymore to hotels in these nearby places. So there is also these backwash effects that so Lisbon is somehow exploiting the beaches of Cascais because people spend the money in beaches and there is a good trains from one place to another. Okay, so we have this list of eventual places that in fact specialized in tourism in India. And then we have these numbers. So captured also by ChatGPT, you have these places, you have tourists, population, and the ratio one regarding the other, then population growth and tourist growth. And that's what I'm going to make a risky analysis of this. So first of all, I put the ranking of these places according to the ratio populational tourists regarding the population. We see that, for instance, those with these numbers, the places that seem to be more specialized are Tirupati, Manali, Bodh Gaya, and similar. So it's not. And then there are places that, although they have tourism, they are not specialized in tourism, like in Delhi, Mumbai, Kerala. Kerala can be if we focus more in smaller towns. And these are places where the economic base of the place is a little bit tourism, but also other places. And then we see a little bit, we have the intuition that it happens the same as it happened in Portugal. So if we put all the places, putting out Mumbai and, but you can have them as well, Mumbai and Kerala and Delhi, then there is no relation between economic growth or demographic growth that measures the economic growth or the demographic growth above 1% or 1 point something percent, that is the demographic growth of India. So we don't see any relation. But if we focus on cities or places that have more than 500 tourists per 100 inhabitants, then there is a relation. It means that the engine of these places has become tourism, is becoming the tourist sector, and that they specialized in these areas. And these places are Tirupati, Manali, the Shmila Golden Temple, and all these places. So if you think about what is the strategy of Sikkim for tourism, it's very nice. Well, not necessarily. It's not part of the economy yet. It can become. That happens also in Portugal. Some places that suddenly, in Alentejo, for instance, Mértola, is growing in terms of tourism intensity. But for the time being, there's no signals that is the case. Okay, there is also this interesting relation between economic growth and tourist growth. Somehow, if we have the multiplier effect symbol, that can be either because there is a decrease in the productivity, that does not seem the case, or because there is an increase in the activity rate. Somehow what is shown is that the activity rate grows with the tourism, with specialization on tourism, which is a good thing, but also it means also that the domestic economy lower down. So people have to work in tourism and do not work at home. So that's that effect is also there. So discussion. There is a relation between tourism and regional development. No, only for regions that have more than 1,000 tourists per 100 area. Only then, in fact, this only when there is specialization, tourist sector uh, promotes growth. Of course, that depends on the scale of the place. But if we talk about urban areas where we have commuters and when everything, most of the things are there, that's the scale that eventually we should look, and not the Delhi or whatever. That's the scale of a quarter in Delhi or the scale of a quarter in Mumbai. So that's the first, well, intuition that differs a little bit from the common sense that thinks that tourism is good for every place. Of course, in India is very big. There are places that have not been discovered, and in one region can become specialized. But the idea is not. It is not for all regions. It does not occur. It is not good for all the municipalities, all the villages within one region. Tourism and planning, well, not necessarily, because you can invest a lot in attracting tourism and people don't go there. So it's so that these programs that try to send money to municipalities in order to promote tourism, okay, it's eventually it's better to discover what is the base of the economy rather than to do an hotel that just for people from the outside and an empty hotel. Well, competitive tourism, sustainable tourism, yes, but we don't know if mass tourism is necessarily worse than, and it depends certainly on the places and the way it is managed. Either the mass tourism or other the more trendy tourism. And competitive strategy, so it is this kind of certification, eco levels, okay, well, they are nice for propaganda, but if they don't fit with reality, that's a problem. And tourism, for tourism, as I said, the time is important. So the way, because if there is a bad experience, then it collapses. If there is a good experience, then it moves on, and that's certainly a very sensitive sector. So conclusions, my advice: if tourism are too many, you must specialize, because it is very much demand driven. Then, while maximizing the benefits for local people along the value chain, and plan for the next phase, where some residents, if you are in a warm climate, somehow became residents, but that once more, that's in terms of culture and in terms of long term, is more to look at the long term demographic evolution of the society, and demographic and spatial evolution of society. If not, okay, it's better if you bet on the other activities like fisheries, agriculture, and so on, and of course to receive some tourism, but it's not the base of the economy. Okay, thank you very much, and well, now I can hear your questions if.
Thank you so much, Professor Tomaz, for providing thorough information about how tourism can be developed and how it influences in the country's GDP. So I'm requesting any participants who are having queries related with the ideas which they have shared, please come up with your questions.
Okay, no questions. I have a question for you. What is the best place in our region to go? And that is, what is the place? I think that's interesting. What is the place, for instance, if in Alentejo, there is one small village that begins to catch up, and it's not yet reached the 1,000 tourists per person, but it's catching up. And this small movement in development of tourism that exists it's very important, because that's eventually the place where we should put an effort and try to see first if people want to have tourists, if there is no reaction against tourists, if they don't rob them, and if they and then to plan for the evolution of this in terms of the and the other thing is that, okay, when it reaches that, we just discovered that when you reach this 15%, then it is, well, carrying capacity. No, it's not carrying capacity. It is the maximum that exists. Maximum that exists. Finally, in terms of this religious tourism, I just read in The Economist, there are some of the religious places have some problems because of too much people. But then we must learn with the others. So it's we have Mecca, we have Fatima, that somehow spread the visiting people along the year. Eventually do the same as well. But is spreading the visitors and organizing this is in locally to invest this money. Of course, Fatima is very easy because people give some donations, and then so they can invest in the infrastructure and so on, in the religious infrastructure to accommodate and to evolve into this capacity to host. But that's a crucial point in these places that become specialized, either through any region. Yeah, they must take care of the public goods, because in effect we have it's not just hotels, we have a public infrastructure and equipments to install there, not only for the local people because they cannot live in slums, but also from outsiders in order to feel comfortable.
Yeah, once again, thank you so much, Professor Tomaz Dentinho, for the enlightened and thought-provoking sessions on competitive sustainable tourism. And the thought that you have shared have truly shed light on the crucial balance between sustainability and competitiveness in the tourism sector, and also offering valuable perspective on how destination can thrive while preserving their cultural and environmental integrity. Meanwhile, from our participants, one has raised questions. Please unmute and please communicate.
Good morning. I have a little bit of query regarding that the very significant questions raised when the one tourism sector has been developed with its locational factors and the very interesting and important tourism resource, and which is uncontrollable in point of view of economical aspects of the local perspective and environmental degradation. So what is your suggestion how we can manage the environmental degradation resists as the prosperity of the same tourism attraction can be continued? Especially you have pointed out the your discussion that some of the very important historical places and lastly in the religious places, it is badly affected the local community, and especially not the community but the environment, with noise pollution, water pollution, air pollution is there. So how can the suggestions we can make for this balance of this environment as well as the progress of the tourist sector? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, I don't have well, each place has its own solution, and of course the solution must be taken gradually, well, somehow learning from the others into what movement are you following, because there are experience of tourism everywhere. So and that has religious tourism, and there are some of them that are more sustainable than others. I think that one crucial point is the taxes, is the public goods. So what you need, in fact, you are attracting people, that did not pay, that eventually will pay for the hotels and will pay for the food, but in fact are not paying for the public goods. So migrants that come to Portugal nowadays, they begin immediately to pay taxes. So tourism don't pay taxes. So I think that taxes should be applied in the system for the improvement of public infrastructures and public equipment and so on that exists in the system, not only for tourists, but also that this is in the place, but also for the local people. And I think that's the crucial point. The other point, which is a little bit strange, but anyway, you can calibrate that, is but I'm an economist, so you cannot be the point of tragedy of the commons in terms of visitors. So if you don't have any somehow ownership through taxes or through a fee that to enter into the cathedral or to enter into a place or to go to Mecca, then of course it's Mecca will be filled up with people and there will be a disaster. So you need to have some fee for outsiders, for young, lower fee for locals. You have to calibrate this fee of entrance, because I don't see any other idea unless to forbid. You don't pass, only for the people that are religious can pass through the gate, like we see in the European cathedrals in Europe, that only if you go to the mass you are allowed to enter in cathedral, otherwise you pay a fee. And that type of smart control of the entrance that is accepted by the population, it's not necessarily a good thing, but it is needed. Otherwise it will be, if it is totally congested. So sometimes we have these principles, okay, why do you should pay to enter into the church? But otherwise the church will be completely congested. So the idea of the fee is not to receive money. The right idea of the fee is to come to the fee or some rule to enter is to like the air flight. So if there is an empty place, the fee is very low, but of course it cannot be congested, it cannot be overloaded. And I think that we should avoid the tragedy of the commons that many times happens in these congested places. We should also create citizen seats through taxes, which is difficult in countries, not in India, but in countries that, for instance, live on taxes based on foreign trade, or live on taxes based on income for the state based on natural resources. So that in creation of some that's a problem of Portugal as well. The creation of some public awareness through payment of taxes based on the places, that's something that I think, and based on actually on the public service that they receive, so by street and by whatever, that's a crucial change that I'm thinking of it in terms of municipal tax, and I think it can have a greater impact that we pay for the good we receive. But we saw the good. We saw the street being paved. We saw the water there without problems. We saw the digital access and so on. And that's something that we don't have. We have in small communities, people are able to, but we don't have at the municipal level, because usually these taxes are controlled by the state or by the whatever, and it's not designed for that people perceive why do they pay and how do they receive them. And that for tourism is crucial, not only for the locals, or eventually to tax more a little bit to tourists, but that's why, we have we economists, we learn how to go to the central bank or to go to the finance minister. That's the best of us. So we'll go to there or teach at university, some of us, not so good. But these people, we should have these type of policies at the local level. and it's different. So the tools are different, and we should learn how to do this and to learn with each other, and that's why we have these associations to learn with each other.
Thank you, Tomaz. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saptarshi sir, for your questions, and thanks to the Professor Tomaz again for the extensive expertise and global outlook he has provided us for a deeper understanding of the different challenges and opportunities that are lying ahead. And we sincerely appreciate the time and effort you have taken to share your knowledge with us today. Once again, sincere gratitude on behalf of the organizing committee and on my personal behalf to Professor Dentinho for providing and for your inspiring presentations. Thank you so much, sir.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Moving on to the next program, we have it's a high time for me to introduce our keynote address of the day. And indeed, it's my privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Gijsbert Hoogendoorn from the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Pardon me, sir, if I mispronounce your name. Professor Gijsbert is a distinguished tourism geographer at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. He has an extensive publication record over more than 100 papers, book chapters, and monographs covering a wide array of topics within tourism geography. His research interests are diverse, encompassing areas such as second homes tourism in the countries like South Africa, Mozambique, China, and Sweden, urban tourism in Johannesburg, and the implications of climate change on tourism in South Africa. And in recognition of his significant contributions to geography in South Africa, Professor Hoogendoorn was honored with the prestigious Gold Medal Award from the Society of South Africa Geographer in 2024. Beyond his research, Professor has served in leadership role within the academic community, and his recent publications include Second Home Tourism in Tropical China, Residents, Perceptions of Socio-Economic Impacts, and then Temporary Residence and Permanent Jobs, Second Home Tourism and Job Creation in the Constructions Industry. So today here in this platform, Professor Hoogendoorn will share his valuable information on path creation for an electricity transitions in the South Africa tourism sector. We eagerly looking forward to hear your session, sir. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Just want to check that you can hear me.
Yes.
And can you see my slides?
Yeah, sir, it's visible.
And it's moving, right?
It's not moving now. It's stuck.
It is blank screen now.
How about now?
Still are not visible.
I can't
Still
see.
stuck. Okay. It's not. Let me just see what I can do here quickly. Okay, it's not crucially important. I can present without the presentation, and hopefully I can get my message across without the aid of visual aids. So this is a paper that I did with a number of colleagues from South Africa and from Strathclyde University in Scotland on in the journal Tourism Geographies, called Path Creation for an Electricity Transition in the South African Tourism Sector. And I had suggested to Starbuck that we change it to this topic rather, as I believe it may have some broader relevance to the different contexts relevant here, especially in the case of India and perhaps the broader subcontinent. So essentially, one of the points we're trying to make in this paper is that low carbon transitions are key to tourism sustainability transition debates. we are increasingly talking about ways in which we can create a low carbon or a carbon offset economy, especially related to tourism, and the debates around that becomes more frequent, and it also becomes more in depth, and that we need to reconsider tourism as part of the energy transitions. For example, in many cases, tourism transportation has been seen as the key issue around energy use. Often, I think we see that the airline industry produces something like 8.8% of all carbon emissions globally. But we often don't see the tourism industry separate from the airline industry in terms of what kind of contributions it makes. And often tourism is seen to be not as energy intensive. So we need to refocus the idea of sustainable or responsible tourism enterprises, and looking at how tourism enterprises can take more of an active role in terms of installing renewable electricity technologies. Okay, then in terms of a broader background, as you may well know, South Africa had about at the fall of apartheid, our racial segregation system that exists in this country until the 1990s. Before the 1990s, South Africa had about 1 million foreign tourists that came to the country, which is very few given that the country is 1.2 million square kilometers big, has a population at that stage of about 40 million people. So very few people coming to the country at that stage, where recently, just before COVID, this had grown to about 16 million tourists over a 30-year period, and now contributes in the region of about 6.4% of the GDP. So ultimately, with minimal effort, just because of political transitions, the South African tourist numbers grew from 1 million to 16 million over a 30-year period, which is generally seen as being quite successful. However, South Africa, in the post-apartheid dispensation, has been struggling significantly with energy provision to its people. And since 2008, we've had something what was called load shedding, or power cuts, where we, in many cases over the last 17 years, would have energy cuts according to a set schedule over different periods of time to reduce the energy load that's been used by the economy and by the people of South Africa, because of the lack of preparation and ability to prepare for the energy usage in a democratic dispensation. Whereas in the past, it was mostly focused around energy provision only for the economy and for so-called white needs, whereas this has changed significantly now. So, but the process of load shedding has been deeply political, because it has to do with which political parties are in control at which period of time, and how this impacts the energy use and provision in the country. But also there's been a major decrease in the cost of renewable energy provision, and the different equipment that is required. And that also plays into why there is load shedding, but also what kind of electricity provision we have in the country. So tourism establishments can play, in my view, an increasingly important role in the use of renewable electricity. So, for the purpose of this keynote address, I will make use of evolutionary economic geography, or EEG theory, to examine the electricity transition in South African tourism sector. We'll synthesize path dependence and lock-in. These are all terminologies I'll explain, but also what kind of innovation providing transition paths we can have. So I'll use this essentially as a multi-level perspective to unpack the regime or electricity system and the niche tourism sector and the factors affecting a tourism and electricity transition. So essentially the argument is that the historic dependence on coal and complex place-based economic, structural and political institutional factors that the country has been using for electricity is creating a lock-in that is carbon intensive and is not necessarily positive and adversely affects an electricity transition in the tourism sector. I'll also finish off the presentation with a commentary on the so-called just electricity transition. So in terms of the theoretical framework, the argument is essentially that within evolutionary economic geography, irreversible losses occur when firms and regions are so-called locked into outdated technologies, which fail to transition to more sustainable paths. But also, if there's a path dependence that's created by the energy system in the country, it can refer to cumulative nature of past effects to either catalyze the implementation of new technologies or lead to so-called lock-ins. Therefore, we need to consider the political, institutional, and economic structural factors that affect lock-ins. And factors affecting transitions occur at spatial scales, such as the niche or micro level, the regime level or meso level, and the landscape macro levels. So we need to essentially look at one, the political, institutional impact factors, the economic structural impact factors, and what causes this to lock in to old ways of doing things, and what kind of path disruption or innovation can take place that transition the path towards high levels of sustainability, or at least try to achieve or attempt to achieve levels of sustainability. So in terms of the methods we used in this paper, we used a number of sources. The first data source is the Green Tourism Incentive Program that's run by the South African government as Department of Tourism, and it was introduced in 2017 to support firms to become more energy efficient. We also received data from the Department of Tourism in 2022, which provided data on the number of applicants of the Green Tourism Incentive Program, or the GTIP for short, and the approval rate and the value of resource improvement interventions. Then the second data source, the annual reports we used the annual reports of three major hotel groups listed at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and these include the City Lodge Hotels, the Southern Sun Hotels, and the Sun International Hotels. Although we only included in this presentation the City Lodge Hotel Group, since they provide an example of the best practice. And the third source is the South African National Parks, as the largest provider of accommodation or available beds in the country. Essentially, South Africa has shifted from an economy based initially in the 19th century around agriculture, and the 20th century largely around mining for gold, platinum, etc. South Africa has now increasingly shifted towards becoming a service-based economy. However, what we call the mineral energy complex is an historical path-dependent factor contributing to intensive electricity and lock-in. There is a large amount of coal, dirty coal in South Africa that can be mined, that is largely beneficial to the stakeholders in terms of financial benefits and political benefits, and therefore there is a lack of technological change. Even and one response to this is the development of coal-fired power stations over the last 20 years. That's been very delayed and very costly, but essentially shows a lock into coal-fired power stations rather than considering renewable options. Therefore, in South Africa, relative to the rest of the world, there is a very low adoption of renewals, and it comes from a very low base. At present in South Africa, and South Africa is a middle-income country, it's only about 7% of electricity is generated via renewable electricity, which is rather limited given that you have a country that has abundant sunshine. We have a part of the country called the Karoo, which is a semi-arid environment, which houses less than 1 million people, but is 400,000 square kilometers big. That is hardly used for any form of renewable energy generation, as an example. So what's required is that there is a major policy change. So although we have some electricity policy changes, and it is ratified according to international policies and international agreements such as the Paris Agreement, the turning point only really agreed in 2010. And this is what's called the Renewable Energy Feed-in Tariff, or REFIT, which led to the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. Let me repeat that because that's quite a few acronyms in there. Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program. And that is essentially the first real policy change that allows business to explore the opportunities to go towards renewable electricity provision. Essentially in South Africa, the electricity position has been, in the vast majority of cases, been coal-fired. It's out of the, say, 250 odd power producing systems in the country, over 200, about 210 of them are coal-fired. We do have some liquid fuel, a little bit of nuclear, some hydro, some pump storage, and very limited solar PV. Now, luckily, or rather a positive offset of the load shedding problem that we have in this country, where not enough electricity can be provided, more and more people have gone towards solar PV systems or wind energy. And out of the, say, 200, now that was the figures I was talking about was in 2010 and 2021. Out of the 220 odd electricity provision systems in the country, around about 180 are now still electricity coal-fired power stations, but there's an increasing amount of renewable electricity systems that are being implemented at present. So while these are encouraging steps, it is not nearly enough in terms of what is required for a full electricity transition. So renewable energy transition remains inadequate, especially with restrictions. So South Africa, as I mentioned earlier, did sign the Paris Agreement, and South Africa is committed to reducing carbon emissions, but there's all kinds of different systems that needs to be decluttered or destabilized to really achieve this level of commitment. In November 2022, we had the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan that was ultimately announced to eventually decommission the coal-fired power stations in the country. But as we often know, to say that you will want to do something and actually doing it, it's not always the same thing, or it takes quite a long time to get this to be achieved. So the electricity crisis in South Africa has essentially been driven by micro-level adaptation of businesses installing renewable electricity, and the tourism industry plays a key role in this process. Let's now move to the tourism sector responses to these lock-in factors and political contingencies. In 2021, the Department of Tourism published the Tourism Environmental implementation plan, and this fund provides 32, let me get this right, provides 30 and 90% of the cost proposed interventions, capped at around 1 million rand per applicant. I'm not sure how much a million rand would be in the currency in rupees, but I suspect probably in euros it should be in the region of about 20,000 euros, give or take. So this GTIP, as I mentioned before, relies on the uptake by tourism, small, medium, and micro enterprises to have a process where, or let me rephrase, this GTIP uptake by tourism SMEs has been modest, but an important example of innovation on a niche level that can be supported by tourism policy. So essentially, the right steps are there, but the massive uptake has been highly problematic. The Department of Tourism has also mentioned that many applications were declined or non-compliant with eligibility criteria and non-submission of requested information. The total value of about 111 projects that were funded is an estimated at about 102 million rand, which the GTIP paid 2/3 and the private financing remaining. So essentially, the governmental initiatives has created a situation where there was 111 projects that started considering how to go towards renewable energy transitions, and this is but a drop in the bucket of what we need in terms of achieving a full or high level of renewable energy implementation. In terms of funding allocation, though, the bad news is the Department of Tourism was also set to decrease the funding for these projects by 16% in the 2022-2023 year. It's only hotels, such as a City Lodge in South Africa, that has rolled out renewable energy installations, because essentially the argument could be that they have sufficient capital backing and capital resources to invest heavily in these renewable electricity installations. So in 2020, for example, the City Lodge had installed PV panels at around 10% of their hotels. This has probably by now grown significantly. 2023 was a very bad year in terms of load shedding. There were times when we had no power for up to 10 to 12 hours a day, and as I'm sure you can imagine, that's very damaging for any economy. 2024 was a very good year with limited load shedding instances, although in the last couple of weeks in South Africa started to re-emerge again. So yeah, it's very low level marginal implementation of solar panels from government perspective or policy perspective, but the private sector has started to initiate this process. Then when it comes to sandparks are South Africa's nationally run national reserves for wildlife, obviously one of South Africa's major drawing cards in terms of tourism. People want to come here to see the big five animals, the lion, the rhino, the elephant, etc. So far, PV panels has been installed at 19 out of the 21 parks that we have in this country, but only about 13 of the 21 sand parks are below the yearly emissions to be considered environmentally friendly, although they do have future plans. So the point is that South Africa has large coal reserves that can be mined quite effectively, is financially beneficial to stakeholders, but also there's an historical reliance onto these lock-in factors. There's essentially not enough of an initiative or a impetus to switch over to renewable energy. So while there's some modest gains been made in renewable electricity deployment, we contend that tourism sector has essentially been unable to de-lock itself from lock-in factors such as dirty coal that's being used. So in the South African context, tourism firms and policy innovation are slowly creating paths for an electricity transition. Although I'm not convinced that we really have I'm not convinced that we really understand the urgency of and the need to transition towards renewable electricity, given the situations around global environmental change and climate change. So, on the one hand, we have regime-level electricity system with some policy reforms such as the IRP, the REIPPPP that I mentioned earlier, the Just Energy Transition Partnerships, some legislative changes, but the resource dependency on the mineral energy complex is too strong, which is still connected to apartheid policies, vested interests, but also post-apartheid political ideologies and state capture. There's also a lack of technological change because of this. So even though South Africa at a niche level does consider or considers responsible tourism to be important, we have some policies such as the GTIP, increased adoption of renewable energies are increasing. We need to really break ourselves free from these lock-in factors that can break us away from state provision of electricity that relies on dirty coal and also the lack of government support. So essentially what we're trying to say in this paper and what is a key contribution excuse me, is that we're emphasizing the indispensable role of public policy, both at the niche and regime levels. Public policy needs to be adapted, but not only do we need to adapt it, public policy also needs to be needs to be implemented. South Africa has wonderful policies. It has a wonderful constitution. It's considered to be one of the most advanced constitutions in the world, but policy and practice and policy and implementation are often two very different things. So there's some innovation in the tourism establishments that introduce renewable electricity, but it's not yet enough. But as Weaver has said, that sometimes these micro transformations that happens at a niche level may accrue over time towards critical threshold for structural change, and tourism needs to play its role here. The reality at the moment is that people in the tourism industry go over to solar power because of self-sufficiency. They do it because they need to provide a consistent electricity to their guests. When people go on holiday, when they go to places, they don't want to be disrupted by a lack of electricity or even a lack of water. So this is an important product to be able, or important source, well, that's not the word either. It's an important aspect of the tourism product to be able to provide consistent electricity. So the extending of renewable electricity rollout in the tourism sector needs much broader collaboration. There's also a need for structural innovation within the tourism sector. So there's a key need to decentralize electricity production and not to be reliant only on state level or state provided electricity. So just as I mentioned before, just some final reflections on the just electricity transition. In South Africa, poor households, and the country has unemployment rate of in the 30%. Almost during COVID, it was around about 40%. So there's a high level of unemployment, and essentially poor households are unable to afford electricity from private suppliers or self-help solutions. So we would question the extent to which the tourism sector can contribute to the just electricity transition, but perhaps new liberal solutions are insufficient for ensuring sustainability of just transition. So on the one hand, we need to break free from state-provided coal-fired power, but at the same time to completely decentralize state-owned power and allow private electricity providers to provide electricity will probably be too expensive. So there is a fine line or a fine balance that can be achieved between what kind of electric transition we can have, who provides it, and when is it just, and when is it affordable to the broader socioeconomic conditions in the country. So we need ultimately greater accountability from the state to advance the country's energy policies. And we would argue that decentralization can be important, but participation by private players in electricity production facilitated energy policy is a better alternative than pure privatization. So essentially, a much greater step needs to be made on a multi-level perspective with different partners in terms of what can be done to, one, provide electricity to people in the country at an affordable rate, especially given the high levels of poverty in the country, but also what kind of renewable energy can be used so we can achieve our Paris Agreement commitments, but also what the role is of tourism in this process to be able to contribute to all of these aspects. And I think I'm going to leave it right there. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Professor Gijsbert, for your insightful information. And I hope if anyone is having any queries regarding the thought he just shared, please open up and please communicate and interact. Please, Professor, please carry on.
Yes, well, thank you very much for this insightful information on South Africa. And I think it's very important that we share what's happening in our countries regarding global warming, because, of course, it is a global problem. Just this year, I did a project for European Union regarding exactly this problem for us in the ultra-peripheric regions and the policies that Europe is trying to push, taxing the fuel of airplanes and air flights. Of course, this will have a greater impact on tourism because it's very much dependent on the cost of flights. And at the same time, in terms of fairness, if people don't pay to go to Morocco and pay to come here, then it will be completely unfair and completely useless in terms of the impact in the economy, because people will continue to fly, but to other places. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you look at the absolute footprint of carbon footprint, although these countries like Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and so on, they show them with a higher level of renewable energies, and that's true. The point is that they are the most polluters in the world, apart from the United States and Luxembourg, Sweden. If we look at the value chain, so Norway, in terms of demand, is very much renewable, but in terms of supply, they extract oil. So I think the first point, it is a global warming, it's a global problem that must be fair and true in the propaganda and in policies. Otherwise, people don't behave. So that's one part, and that we show in the agenda the percentage of renewable, but we don't show the actual absolute footprint per person. And if you look at the taxes on carbon, the taxes on carbon are much lower in Norway, in Sweden, and in northern countries, naturally, because they need to heat themselves, rather than in Portugal. So, or Portugal or Malta. Malta is the best country in the world. So that's one point in terms of fairness. It's a global problem, but must be a global solution with truth. In the solutions, you have the two sides, as usual. The supply side that works on the renewables, and it's a good thing, and the demand side that works on the price. Regarding renewables, my question is whether in South Africa there is innovation and production and of renewables, because of course that's the business. So if it's nice to show that renewables are important, but then if the technology comes from Denmark or from whatever, then you are somehow not profiting from the multiplier effects that exist in South Africa. So my question is whether, apart from the need in every country to produce renewables, it is also what is in the production side, what part do you have there? Finally, I think in terms of the renewal, I can agree with you that we need some coordination. Well, islands are like small continents. And the problem here of the renewables on one hand is that they have this egalitarian perspective. And so although of prices, so although in the more remote islands, renewable can be accepted if the price was a little bit higher, because you have these common prices, the change that you are talking about, lockdowns, things, it's not only, it's based on this idea of egalitarian price, and of course the production part is not equal across the country. And what we need, actually, well, we did 10 years ago, I don't know if that's solved already, it is the software that manage the networks of renewables, with solar and wind and so on. And we don't, well, I don't think, because eventually there is not demand for it, because you have large grids and we don't have this problem, but we have small grids. Then we need to have to have your computer, don't destroy your computer, you have to have a good manager of the flow of energy. And also in this part, I wonder if in South Africa there is people working on that, but because in small communities, it's crucial to, if you have to have renewables, to have this control of the, I don't know, the flow of energy that exists. Thank you very much. So my question is on the supply side, if you have this capacity to move into renewables with, and the same for India, with good, and not just buying panels and wind powers from Denmark or from Germany. So that's the question.
Thanks very much. Yes, so you're 100% correct. What happens in Africa as a whole, but in South Africa, is that the mining takes place here for the raw materials to design the solar panels elsewhere. So a lot of the raw materials goes from here to China. China then produces a lot of the solar panels, and then South Africa buys those exact same solar panels from China and brings it back here, and then you put it onto the roof, and then I think the calculation only starts at that point, where a lot of damaging process already taken place, going from South Africa to China and back, or elsewhere in the world. There are some development of solar panels or production of solar panels in South Africa, which uses raw materials from Africa or South Africa, and then the solar panels are, for example, produced here. But that is obviously not in the scale and at the cost of which the Chinese can produce these very same materials. So there's this disconnect between the innovation that needs to take place and the actual calculations that you are making. So that's the first problem I would state as an issue, is that the world relies on African natural resources to get all of this raw materials, to produce it and then sell it elsewhere. And the calculations are only made from a certain point, and that's where the problem lies. I think the second point in South Africa is that while there's innovation, this innovation is only driven by crisis. It's only when the state cannot produce enough electricity through coal-fired power stations that people start implementing alternative sources, be it solar panels or wind farms or whatever the case may be. It's only when the state fails to produce cheap electricity that people start innovating. I mean, I have solar panels in my house, and I'll be completely honest, I only have it because the state cannot produce electricity for me at a cheap price. So I am green and I'm renewable purely because of adaptation, not because of any mitigation. So I think that's where the problem lies, that people will become innovative and they'll mitigate and do these things only when a crisis hits, not beforehand. And that's where a core issue lies here, or core problem is that we don't innovate because we want to innovate. We innovate because we have to. And human beings tend to be very comfortable in that sense. And that's where it is quite problematic. So, yeah, I hope I answered most of your questions there.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your wonderful question. And what I understand is that human works only when there is a need, right, Professor Gijsbert? Yeah. And I'm requesting Dr. Saptarsi to please kindly interact.
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful discussion. I have a very important doubt that whether any kinds of the microclimatic change with the tourism prosperity can be related, because we are talking about when globalization, global climate issues, but whether the microclimatic change and the rise and because of the deteriorations of the environment, the huge impacts of the tourism. That is my query. How far it is connected with the South African scenario, along with another thing that the enhancements of the tourism, how it is connected with the privatization along with the decentralization in your part, or whether it is connected at all. So this is my
I'm going to answer the first question, then I'm just going to ask you to repeat the second question. I didn't quite get it. There was a bit of a breakup in the communication, the system. But I think in terms of the microclimates, South Africa is a semi-arid country. It's marketed as sunny South Africa. We have many parts of the country have over 300 days of sunshine, and in fact, some cases even more. So it's produced or it's marketed as a very climate-friendly environment or good climate, a place to come to if you want a good climate. But increasingly, what's happening as a result of climate change is that our temperatures are increasingly becoming higher and higher. Having places that never had temperatures reaching maybe the mid-30s are now hitting temperatures in the 40s. And places that are very mild are now hitting degrees into the 30s. So essentially what happens is your tourism comfort is declining slowly but surely because of the different microclimates. It's becoming hotter, and then there's obviously then a reliance on air conditioning, which again causes its own problems in terms of carbon emissions. So again requires you to think about it. So in terms of the microclimates, it's becoming drier and it's becoming hotter. And that is causing stress for tourists and people providing tourism products. And therefore there is a need to have renewable energy or energy that can be provided independently for example, the use of air conditioning or architecture that changes rather than being north-facing, rather being south-facing, or different type of building materials to try and adapt to the heat and the drought that is happening as a result of microclimates. And of course, this is a global issue and is caused by a variety of factors. Please just repeat your second question.
This is the second question is whether there is any connectivity at all between the tourism prospects, tourism development, and the role of the privatization, or they have the decentralization. They're talking about the decentralizations of the changes. Yeah. So how far it is connected, or in your country, or what about your idea about this?
Okay, I understand. Okay, thanks very much for that clarification. Yes, so South Africa has the electricity provision was almost the vast majority of the cases, 99.9% of all electricity provision is state-owned. State monopoly has completely controlled that. But they always produced electricity at a very stable supply at a very cheap rate for a very long time. So nobody had an issue with state monopoly. But because the state monopoly started to struggle, that's where the decentralization is taking place. Excuse me. And the decentralization is a positive step forward in the sense that they use more innovation. They may provide more electricity quicker at a higher level, more innovative ways, but it can be way more expensive. And also, you don't always know if you can trust the private providers of electricity. So there is now, South Africa has now been decentralized in terms of electricity provision, and it's slowly being introduced to try and provide more private sector producers. But I think the verdict is still out whether this will be a good idea or not. So is it the devil you know or the devil you don't know? Yeah, I think the verdict is very much still out. We'll need to see what the decentralization and deregulation will do. What has happened in agriculture in South Africa, deregulation of agriculture has made the farmers in the country very few. That made them very powerful, very wealthy, very high-level producers of food. And you can probably say that may be the same case with electricity provision. You may have a select number of very effective power producers, but do they approach it from an ethical perspective, or is it purely finance-driven? At the same time, government may not be as finance or profit-driven, but they are producing dirty coal ineffectively. So yeah, it's a complex and tricky situation, and we'll have to see how this plays out.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saptarshi, sir, for your beautiful questions, and at the same time, heartfelt thanks to Professor Gijsbert for your perceptive and thought-provoking visions that you have shared on path creation of an electricity transition in the South African tourism sector. And indeed, your expertise and deep analysis have provided us with a comprehensive understanding of how these sustainable energy solutions can reshape the futures of tourism. As I must say, not only in South Africa, but also across the globe. And your discussion on the challenges and opportunities within a transition has also given us valuable perspectives on how policy and again innovation, strategic planning can work together to create a more sustainable tourism industry. So I, on behalf of this organizing committee, on my personal behalf, sincerely appreciate the time and effort you have taken to share your research and valuable findings and informations with us today. And your contributions in this field indeed are truly commendable, and we are grateful for the knowledge that you have imparted. So as we have come to the conclusions of this inauguration ceremony, I would like to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to all the esteemed dignitaries, speakers, and participants who have joined us today. The Global Tourism Summit 2025, it is not just a platform for discussion, but it is going to provide an opportunity to improve or also for meaningful collaborations, which will help us in exchanging ideas and contribute towards sustainable and innovative tourism practice worldwide. And at the same time, we are very pleased to announce that the selected high quality research paper presented during this summit will have the opportunity to publish in the Indian Journal of Regional Science, which will again provide a prestigious platform to showcase, to share the different research which is evolving, which is occurring in the field of tourism, regional development, and sustainability. And once again, a heartfelt thank you to all for being a part of this remarkable event. We look forward for an engaging and intellectual, enriching experience throughout this summit. Let's continue this journey of learning and discovering together. And let us now proceed to the next session with great enthusiasm. And the next session will be starting from 5 o'clock. So I'm requesting